Such a giant fan of Harold Lloyd. So, and when I found out that Harold was a lamb back in appointed in 1925, I was like, we have to do this because this is a perfect coincidence. So anyway, so welcome Suzanne Lloyd. Call you Sue. I am so glad that you could make it tonight. I'm really happy.
Yeah, thanks so much. And it's a great honor to be here with Mark and you. You have put so much time and effort into this. I have to thank you. You get Harold Lloyd 101 prize, the a triple A in information support and enthusiasm. So thank you. And um, I'm thrilled to be here to represent my grandfather.
Yes, yes, and that's I really want to get right to that. But before, just I think another kind of fun thing is it happens to be 420 for those people who know what 420 is, but it's also an important date in Harold world. So what is that, Suzanne?
This is Harold's 128th birthday anniversary of his birth. And actually, to tell you the truth, my son, Christopher Lloyd Hayes, and I just went out and visited Harold out in Forest Lawn in Glendale today and put some big old sunflowers on the whole family's crypt and said happy birthday to him. And those sunflowers played a major part in the kid brother that he made in 1927. And so we thought that might be appropriate. So we go out on the anniversaries of my mom, my grandmother, his, of course, his leading lady, Mildred Davis, his son, Harold Jr. Anyway, so we went out there today, but um, he loves celebrating birthdays and anniversaries and everything. So I kind of grew up with that.
That's neat. Well, okay, so we'll get right to Harold. And I'm assuming, people who are here are interested in this because they know who Harold Lloyd is. But, just to, kind of a little, intro or whatever. I mean, he was sometimes called the third genius, along with Charlie Chaplin, who was also a lamb, by the way, and Buster Keaton. And so, did that term come up when Harold was still with us, or did that come up with the Kevin Brownlow documentary
No,
that
that was completely conceived by Kevin Brownlow and David Gill and myself when we did the documentary in 1989. No, they didn't call him the third genius. I don't know. Um, I think in some ways, sometimes it puts him at a disadvantage and they kind of, it stuck.
yeah.
I don't think he'd like the term very much. I don't, when I did a book with Abrams on his films and his life, I called it Master Comedian. I think that kind of falls more into his genre or what he did for film, or maybe as a filmmaker, he was a master filmmaker, being a producer and an actor, and you know, he didn't take credit for directing his own films, but his handprint was all over his films.
Right. Right.
Whereas Keaton and Chaplin took credits for directing. He didn't feel it was. He felt that he needed the collaboration, camaraderie, just having a wonderful relationship on set. But he said, I always wanted somebody and people to tell me if it looked good, if it looked right. He said, you can't just be the cook on every pot and you need people to tell you. And even though, it was his film, um, he didn't feel he wanted always to help other people, like writers. He made a lot of writers into directors: Sam Taylor, Ted Wilde, Delmer Daves. I mean, it went on and on.
Right. And actually, I mean, that's a good point because from what I understood, he did have a good relationship with people involved with the production of his films. And But I think that even extended when the films weren't in production. Is that correct? I mean, he kept the staff on payroll and things like that?
Yes, completely. He kept the staff on payroll at his studio so he could have the same cinematographer and the same, he even paid, the grips and the electricians. I mean, he kept them as a team and he felt comfortable working with them and knew that they knew where he was going. And if things came up that he wanted to save that might have been like an accident, like the accident that happened off the fire truck in Girl Shy when he was pulling on the fire hose, or um, the trolley in Speedy with the horse, and that was an scripted accident. But he said, let's work around that, and how do we use it to our advantage? But he also liked it where it could move smoothly, and they knew the type of. He was very involved in putting, using a camera and building. He built the first dolly track. He came up with an escalator, so was wrapped around a tree so he could climb the kid brother for the scene where he was saying goodbye to Mary over the hill. He came up with, a track so he could run in the football game, because those weren't steady cams like we have now. All those cameras were basically they were hand cranked, or they were stationary on tripods. And he said, I want to move the cameras. Like in Girl Shy, the chase in Girl Shy, he had cameras going manholes in the street because he said, I want to see the horses over my head, and the effect of the cart and the horses coming at you and then going over you. And of course, that was picked up by Lewis Milestone 3 years later in shooting Ben-Hur. And that's how they shot Ben-Hur. So he was always kind of pushing the envelope.
Right. Yeah, he did that. I know. Well, here's the other thing, and sort of preparing for this evening, I revisited a lot of Harold's work, which was there could be worse ways of having to prepare for something than watching like a whole weekend of Harold Lloyd films. And I noticed that he did that in For Heaven's Sake. Also, he had a camera down in a trench, and a bus comes right over that trench. And I have to, so I hope that our viewers, if you're not familiar with these films, please look them up. We'll talk about that later too. But that bus, that whole bus sequence in For Heaven's Sake is fantastic. I mean, that's worth the price of admission right there. Just so many things going on one bus, and like banana peels and drunken men doing crazy things. It's just wonderful. So yeah, I noticed that the bus going over the trench, which is really neat. So since we're talking about the films, why don't we go back to the earlier stages of his career, because he started. You mentioned before we came on now that he was interested in the stage, and he did do some theater work before he became an extra in films. But then he hooked up with Hal Roach, and was that his name? Yeah, Hal Roach. And then they got their own ball rolling, and so he did not start with the glasses character. Is really where I'm going with this. He started with other characters, correct?
He did. Um, we might have a surprise guest.
Mm.
Um,
Dogs.
Bruce Goldstein might join us.
Oh.
So he just answered me, please do. Maybe we should can we send him a link? Or I wonder if he's got it. Anyway, what happened was, he was working in theater when he came out on flip of a coin with his father. It was either, tails, he was going to go back east and try Broadway, or heads, he was going to go to California and do film. He had been trained as a kind of a theater actor in high school, and he studied under a man named John Conley, who had a players club. And coincidentally, John Conley had moved his players club to San Diego. But Harold came out, worked in a theater in San Diego. His father tried to open a diner, and his dad kind of lost his shirt. His father was kind of not a great businessman, and had a, kind of a drinking problem. And, Harold had always been the person to try and pull the family together. His parents were separated in 1912, which was very unusual, and they got a divorce then. And he had an older brother, Gaylord,
Right.
who left and tried his hand at farming and ranching up in Montana. And that, after his brother ended up in Hollywood and everything, then he came out to Hollywood and started in the film business. But Harold liked theater, and he got very good at putting on makeup of different characters in the theater. But he came up, he worked for Edison down in San Diego. They had a studio there. He was in some different films there. He then came up to Hollywood because his father had moved up to Los Angeles to see if he could start another business after he lost his diner in San Diego, left Harold in San Diego to take care of himself. But Harold came in and he snuck in the gates at Universal because he knew how to apply different makeups, and he could sneak in as different people. And he was attuned enough to know that he had to get to the first AD to get a part. And they used to put all the extras in a bullpen. And in the bullpen was Hal Roach, who really didn't want to be an actor, but he was there. He really wanted to be a producer. And they used to play cards together all the time and also play handball. And what happened was Roach, um, I believe, lost his aunt. He had a little bit of a little inheritance. And he just said, "Come on, Harold, you be the actor, I'll be the producer. Let's go out and just get a camera and we'll start shooting ourselves, because this is like, what are we doing here?" And that's how it all came to be. And they went out on the streets and started shooting. But Harold copied um, Chaplin, but it wasn't a copy, it was the opposite. He had a little hat, a little broken mustache, tight clothes, really kind of scrunched together. He wasn't the tramp in bulky clothes and a swagger. And he didn't like that. He really didn't. He said, "This isn't me. It doesn't fit me. I mean, it could be funny." And it was doing all right. And then he went to Lonesome Luke, which was more of a boy. And he liked the reality of the boy, but he still wanted to bring it more present as to a real person. He was still kind of a comic, but remember, all the comics then had mustaches, they had a hat, they had a way to be different, whether it was mutton chops and mustaches or funny hats. And he really wasn't thrilled with that either. And he happened to go to a theater and he saw a character with glasses. He was a priest, and he said, "Wait a minute, people do wear glasses, and everybody had to have kind of a trademark." And he went, let me think about this. Went to Roach. Roach said, "No, why are you doing that? That's silly. We're doing really well with this." And he went, "No, I'm not comfortable." But as an actor or a creative entity, a person who really was a producer, I want to say, underneath, and he was an actor. But as Roach always said, Harold Lloyd was the best actor playing a comedian than anybody had really knew. He was an actor. And comedy, they always say, is harder than drama. So the two of them set off. And finally, Roach said, "Well, I don't believe you with the glasses." And he said, "Well, believe me." And Roach said, "No, let's do this. I'll do one film where you play the boy and you won't wear the glasses. The other one, you can wear your glasses and see where it goes." Well, Harold won that bet, along with, he loved winning it, beating him at cards too. So, and Roach was a great card player and a great poker player too.
Interesting. Yeah, these guys. I know Keaton was a big bridge player as well. So I guess cards was a thing back then.
Well, they didn't have social media and computers and iPads and Blackberries and everything else. I'll tell you, Harold would have loved being here with all this technology. We probably would have had to moved out of the house and gotten our own house, because he would have totally ensconced the house with technology. You wouldn't have been able to walk in for the wires and the computers and the screens and everything, because he was a complete techie nut.
I was gonna, that was a question I was gonna ask you actually. I had a feeling he would have liked all of this, like the
Oh,
streaming and all
he
of that.
never would have slept. He would have just been out of his mind. He'd be up there at Apple saying, please just let me sit up here and watch you. Or, I mean, anything, anything. He
Yeah,
loved it. Well, he had such a love and a belief in 3D
right.
and 3D photography that he shot, close to 200,000 3D photographs that I have in his 3D library. And he got onto that when it first came out, really to the public, not to the government, because the government had it during the war. But he loved that, and he worked a lot with a lot of the technicians and different people with 3D, and represented it, and always believed, and said in 1924 at his studio, which is now the General Service Studios on Las Palmas and Santa Monica, the Los Angeles Times came and interviewed him when he was doing Girl Shine. And this was his first film away from Roach, his first film, and first film at his own studio. I say, why worry after Safety Last? Why worry in 23, the end of 23? He really produced that. Roach was playing with Our Gang and doing Our Gang. And actually, Harold made a cameo with his new leading lady, Jabina Ralston, in the Hal Roach's first Our Gang film, in their costumes from Why Worry. And when they came to the studio and they said, hey, Harold, what do you think about film and movies and where's it all going? And he said, well, number one, talkies are here. He said, they're not coming out yet, but it's here. And he said, color's here too. And he said, they're going to be color pictures, they're going to be talking pictures. But he said the biggest change, and they said, oh, okay, well, he said, but the big change is going to be when films are going to be able to be stereographic or in a form of a 3D. And he said that will change the motion picture business forever and will take it to its next level because it will be so real. And that's exactly what happened. And then people used to fight him and say, oh, well, in the 50s, look, House of Wax, it was okay. It's a novelty. Or Bend It, Fork River. I mean, there were so many 3D. Kiss Me, Kate was a fabulous example of a 3D film. And then he just said, well, no, it's not. The technology hasn't hooked up with the film yet. It's not there yet. You have to wait. It's going to get much better with this situation of 3D films. And now you look at it today, and he was totally right, because everybody kind of poo-pooed it and dropped it in the 50s, and they didn't touch it for a long time. But he said, it will come. It will really come. He had a real belief, and he was a lot of himself was really a pioneer and an adventurer. And I think he liked to see things in the future come out.
Right, right. You know what? You mentioned the 3D, and I do have a couple. You sent me a couple of samples. Of course, these are flat images, but of the 300,000 or 200, 300,000 images, uh,
About 200,000. I've done actual virtual reality shows. Well, that's Marilyn Monroe,
there's my
obviously.
son. Right.
But that was shot in her apartment in Beverly Hills. And his shooting partner there was Philippe Halsman, the famous photographer, who they were shooting her for the cover of Life magazine in 53
Right,
or
right.
54.
You sent me so many pictures. I didn't think I could include all of them, but I figured, hold on a second, I had Betty Page, this is another one. But he also photographed just a lot of, kind of up and coming actresses, I understand. And he had them to the house and all that kind
He
of stuff.
did. He did. His real love, he wasn't really a cinema photographer like Roddy McDowall or like Kenny Rogers. He liked shooting real people in real situations on his travels and his extensive traveling that he did through all of Europe and Asia and everything, and the United States and Canada and Mexico. he really liked looking at real life.
Right, right.
I mean, he didn't mind taking pictures of Betty Page or Marilyn Monroe or Jane Mansfield, of course, and he also did a lot of studies nude photography with a lot of the openings of the girls when Playboy, um, first came out with Hefner.
Right. Interesting.
I did a book on his called Harold Lloyd's 3D Hollywood Nudes in 3D, and also a book called 3D Hollywood.
Right. And, so I have a kind of a funny story. I told you this already, but we did encounter each other once before, back when you released one of those books, and you came to the city and did a presentation of quite a few of his 3D photographs at the Museum of Sex. And at that point, I was I was such a humongous fan of Harold. I was kind of like fangirling all over you in the gift shop among the sex toys and the edible underwear and everything. So that must have been very surreal. I mean, I'm sure you don't remember it, but
Oh no, I remember that night. It was pretty wild, and they asked me to do that, and then I left them in a kind of a form of an exhibit that you could see some of the photographs in 3D. Yeah,
yeah,
the book publisher set that up,
yeah,
and no, but that was a fun night. People never thought about that side of his life or what he did.
yeah. And that's a nice book too. I mean, I've seen. I haven't seen the book recently, but it's a very well presented, collection of his photographs. So that's really it's worth looking up too, because I assume they're not. Are they in print anymore? These books?
Well, you can buy, yeah, you can still get them out on Amazon.
Sure. Oh,
I
great.
did another book called Master Comedian about his film work. It's a beautiful black and white book
Yes.
with Abrams.
Yes, I have that one. It's a great book. um, okay, so I still have some questions about, his work. You were talking about him being such a pioneer and the elevator for Girl Shy. So what's happening there is he not Girl Shy, I'm sorry, the
Kid Brother.
Kid
It's
Brother.
okay.
Thank you.
He
He's
did too many films.
he
You
did.
get confused.
Well, like the Lonesome Lukes, there's like a couple hundred of them, right? Or there were.
Yeah, there were. He
Right.
lost a lot in a fire.
Right.
Actually, it was a fire that was back east at Pathé, and then he lost some at his house where he had a film vault. He had film vaults.
Right, right. Okay, well, since we mentioned that, I will show you guys a picture. Let's see, this picture of Harold surveying the damage. Yeah, so this was the vault that he had on his property. So the property itself was called Green Acres, and it was how many acres? 15 acres in LA?
Yeah, it was 16 acres. It's in Beverly Hills. It's now 8 acres, and it's a National Historical Trust home. I made it and had it. I got it on the preservation list for historical homes for the United States, like Mount Vernon or the White House. Or it's a beautiful estate. It's privately owned, but it cannot be demolished or changed, or it has to stay in the form it's in.
Oh, that's great. Unlike Pickfair, which is gone. Yeah.
That's right.
So this vault. So I don't know how much people are aware of nitrate film stock and how difficult it is to deal with. So maybe you could mention, just talk a little bit about that and the result, why this happened.
Well, let me clarify. I wasn't there when it happened.
Oh no, I know.
That's okay. But some people think that I've been there forever. I feel like I have been there forever and doing this forever, because I started at a pretty young age, kind of helping them restore the films when I was like, I don't know, 15. I was rewinding nitrate film in the cutting room that we had at the estate. But nitrate film was your stock for any of your film, and it's silver nitrate, and it's explosive, and it has to be handled in the right way and preserved. But of course, it was the best element that you could have to make prints. And this is what they used. They showed nitrate prints in theaters, and they used to have these rollers on the projectors. So if a fire happened, they could stop it. But it needs to be taken care of. But I don't, with this fire, it got too hot and there was some film in there that had deteriorated. Luckily, he lost some film, but there were backups on it in another vault, but he lost outtakes and cuts and things like that in this fire. But as I said, in the early 30s, he bought all his films away from Roach. And Roach said, "What are you going to do here?" And he said, "I don't know. I was in them. I'd like to own my films." And he was very proactive about owning his own copyright and owning the films. And Roach said, "Well, I don't care," because he'd gone on to Our Gang and he'd gone on to Laurel and Hardy. And he went, "Okay, Harold, well, what are you going to do with them?" And he said, "I don't know. I just want to have them." And after that, a few years after that, there was a fire in a vault back east, and he lost a lot of the one reelers.
Right. So that would be the Willie Works and the Lonesome Lukes and
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
But a lot of the archives still, we pick up things from archives that people have found.
I was wondering, yeah. So you're still locating missing films and things like
Sometimes, yeah, we just put together on my last release for Criterion, we put together Over the Fence, which was his first film with the glasses,
that.
with Baby Daniels. And it's a baseball film, so it's very perfect for this season right now,
Right.
because baseball season is starting. And we found Hey There. And we thought Hey There was, really totally gone. It's missing a few minutes. I think it's missing about 4 minutes or something. But Dino down at USC preserved it with Criterion, and we got some other bits that were in the Lloyd vault and put it together with UCLA. And UCLA, I must say, through all the years, UCLA has done my film preservation, along with the beginnings, which was Richard Simonton, who had an extensive collection. And he actually started preserving films for Harold early on with Richard Carell and a gentleman named Dave Knoll, who's a big aerial cinematographer now, and Richard Carell being a director. And, it's interesting, Harold kind of handed his film collection over to younger people and said, "You know what to do. You're going to film school. Let's get this done. Let's put it in order." And they were really thoroughly excited. And he liked being around younger people with a lot of energy, who had a lot of proactive thoughts and thinking, because in a lot of ways, Harold wasn't old. He was a young, energetic, fast thinker, great mathematician, just wanted to go and enjoy life, even though he was much older than everybody else. He liked that youth quality and that energy. And actually, that energy and youth quality shows up constantly in his films, because that's what he was. And also, nobody really, they talk about, oh, he made thrill pictures. Well, he made basically 4, okay, if you really want to put it down. But he was really the father of romantic comedy. I mean, if you think about it, the comedians of those days were not romantic comedians. They didn't get the girl all the time. The second plot in their films was not chasing the girl, either trying to date her and get engaged to her, marry her, romance her, and have her in the end. Every movie on a Lloyd film, it's basically he and the girl at the end, and they get together. And that is what romantic comedy is about. But you have to be a real person to be able to play romantic comedy. And his character with his glasses and his ordinary clothes and his suit, or his white shirt and his chinos and his saddle shoes, and the freshman to his suit he wears in safety last. I mean, those were all regular walking around clothes. He didn't have per se any costume. I mean, yes, if he played a taxi driver, he might put on a vest and a taxi driver hat, or if he was playing an ice cream guy, a soda jerk, he'd have a outfit that a soda jerk would wear, but it wasn't a costume. The only thing he relied on was his glasses, and then, for heaven's sake, for fashion's sake and everything of those days, everybody wore hats, and he had a straw hat, so it was his hat and glasses, and that's what he based his whole character on. I hope I answered that question.
Beth, you're muted.
I've lost
Got it.
everything.
Okay, sorry about that. I had muted myself because I was clearing my throat and then I couldn't unmute. So, can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
Yes, and you did answer my question. Actually, you answered a bunch of my questions by answering
Oh,
that.
good. Okay. I'm sorry if I ramble on.
No, that's exactly that's why we're here. So when you're that actually kind of leads me to something else. So when he started into the boy, the glasses character, these are still one reelers, which are about 11 minutes, and they're still kind of knockabout. There's a lot of people
Slapstick, knockabout, rolling, punching. Yeah.
Yeah, so the longer these films got, the less knockabout they got, the more sophisticated they got, and having watched a lot of these over the last week or so, I can say the more enjoyable for me they got, actually. And so did he know that this evolution had to happen? I mean, clearly he made it happen, but was that something like on his mind?
Oh, definitely. He
Yeah.
wanted to go farther. I mean, he was making two reelers, and the first one, like when he got to like among those present, he pushed it and he said, "We've got more here," and it ended up a three reeler. Then he got to Sailor Made Man, and it was, and he had stories. I mean, they just didn't run out with a camera and go, "Okay, Harold, do something funny." I mean, they had storylines. They didn't have scripts because they didn't have sound, but it was plotted out, and how their emotions and what was played and where the cameras had to be positioned to get certain things, and the subtle approach to what was going to happen with the action. I mean, and it was rehearsed. And when he got to Sailor Made Man, that went to four reels. And then he progressed, and what he came up with was Grandma's Boy. And that was basically his first feature. And there he went back and took comedy and drama and mixed it. And nobody had ever really somehow, I'm sure people had thought about it, but he was the first person to go and venture out and blend the two. And he put himself into a place where he played one character, which it was in present time, and put himself back and drink as like pretending he was like his grandfather. And that was during the Civil War. And he was with his grandmother. So he took something and built upon it, but he wanted it to be different in a comedy sense. And comedy is really very heavy drama. So in a lot of ways, it really goes hand in hand. And that was a huge success for him. And people had never experienced that. He kind of was like, he wanted to give people, and also in his philosophy with his distributors, he'd go from one show, one film that was really more slapstick, more gags, less of a plot, to another film the next time that had more plot, and yes, a lot of gags, and yes, a lot of thrills, but there was more story meat to it. And he said, you don't want to give people the same thing all the time. So what you want to do is pull them in one direction and then another and then they won't get tired because then they can come back and see something else. And he'd figured that out very early on when he had Pathé as his distributors, even with the one-reelers.
Right.
So does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. No, he's very, I mean, super smart guy. It's really, really impressive. And
But he wanted to be adventurous. I mean, he was a creative entity. He was a creator. He was a producer. Yes. Did he write? No. Did he sit with the writers? Yes. Did he hear all the writers' stories? Yes. And he would work with them all the time, every day, because he felt that was the basis. Writing was the basis of the film, not him just getting up and doing a piece of business. Or he also knew that you didn't want to take a piece of business, even though he called it one gag following another gag was called a topper. He wanted that business couldn't go that far. I remember, well, he was a real dear friend of Jack Lemon's, and his first film, he came out and he was, and Jack Lemmon was a dear friend of the family's, and it was a relationship that he got because of my mom, Gloria, my mother, Gloria, and Cynthia Stone, his first wife and mother of his son, Chris Lemmon, were roommates in New York, and they were models and doing radio shows and little acting bits. And Jack was dating Cynthia, and he was going to Harvard. And he said, "Well, I don't want to go into my family's business, and I don't want to do that." And his parents were quite well to do. And he said, "I want to be in film." And he used to come and sleep on the girls' sofa in their apartment in New York. And finally, Dad said, "Well, you know," my mom said, "Well, I think you better meet my dad. Maybe he can help you and talk to you and give you some directions and stuff." And he did. And when he did his first film with Judy Holliday, It Can Happen to You, was that the time?
I'm not sure.
I just saw it.
Somebody.
Anyway, but he came and he said, "Jack," he said, "that was wonderful. But there was a scene you just went right to the edge. And if you'd gone farther, you would have had a mess on your hands." And he always felt that pulling back was better on some gags than being so broad. Less was more.
Yes.
And he always used to say that. And he would even criticize himself, going, "I don't know." And he sometimes, when he put compilations together of his films, and I remember sitting watching Girl Shy with him. I was older, and I'd seen, World of Comedy. I kind of was with him. The family went on tour for when I was in the summer, when I was with him, and then Funny Side of Life. And he used to always flinch and go, "Oh, I just should have cut another 3 minutes out of that chase on Girl Shy." And we kept going, "Don't touch it, don't touch it." Always trying to tweak to another.
Yeah.
But I think artists do that, I'm sure. And but he kind of created, I guess, what you want to say, a formula. Harold Lloyd movies have a form of a formula of how they go and what happens there. He branded himself before I think brands were, really known in films.
Yes, that would be true. And also, this is sort of making me think of another one of the innovations that he did was that he was the first, I think, was he the first guy to do the like the audience previews, and then he would
Yes, he
information.
did. He would go and preview a film out of town. Like now, yeah, I'm sitting in West LA, but he'd previewed in Glendale, or he'd previewed in Culver City. I mean, it was like that was out of town then. But he would do that right up until the end with with his compilation films. He came up with an idea. He came up with a thing called a laugh-o-meter to judge how people laughed and what the laughter was, so he could track it. And then he would take the films out. And as you were talking about, actually, for heaven's sake, he would take the films out and he'd have the audience write cards, and he'd just take it into a cold audience. They didn't know he was coming or what they were going to see. The audience would come in to watch, I don't know, whatever, maybe a Chaplin film, or maybe Laurel and Hardy, or maybe a drama, Doug Fairbanks. And they'd say, no, we're going to preview a brand new Harold Lloyd movie and we need your comments. And he'd read those comment cards and he'd go into the studio and do scenes. And in fact, For Heaven's Sake, he pulled 20 minutes out of the film and redid a complete scene. And he also did that when sound came in with Welcome Danger, and he shot that as a silent film. And he said, I don't know if we should release this. I think we have to go back in and totally redo this again and make it a talking film. He said, you can walk into a theater, and he said, people are, busting themselves over watching ham and eggs fry in a pan or a train going through a station. He said, what are they going to do if they see that, this is a funny movie, but it's silent? He said, what do we, and he just turned around, put $1 million of his own money into it, recast half the film, and laid out sound. And sound was crude then, and especially dubbing people's voices. And some of the actors he loved dearly, but they couldn't talk. They didn't have the chops. I mean, if you look at Singing in the Rain, there's the perfect example. And he had to recast some major people in the film, but he put it out. And of course, he had to put out the silent version, because it was a transition where some of the big theaters had sound equipment to show a sound film, but the people out, who were more out in the, out in more remote places, they were still playing it with a little orchestra or a piano. And in fact, I think it was Bruce Goldstein, I don't know, but he found a print and a shipping label of Why Worry up in an outpost, I want to say Alaska somewhere. It was so funny. And he said, have you received the print yet? I went, where did you get this? And it was amazing. And it was a shipping print on it. He went, you better check and see if FedEx has delivered it yet. I was like, oh my God, probably was coming Pony Express and I missed it. But it was, he wanted to please his audience and his fan base. And that's how he could do it then, with the preview cards and listening and reading into what they wanted. And he kind of, he put his ego aside and listened to them, because, he made more films than Chaplin or Keaton. He turned out 2 films a year, where in some point Chaplin didn't make a film for almost 8 years. I mean, he couldn't find the vehicle. Harold just kept going.
Yeah, it was very prolific. And it's funny you mentioned Singing in the Rain. I was going to say Harold was fortunate he did not have a Lena Lamont kind of voice, thankfully. And actually, Chaplin and Keaton, they all had fine voices, which was fortunate for them. So I guess it seems Harold did not have an issue with sound at all, which is good. That's really good.
Remember, he also had a voice, he was from the Midwest, and his voice was a little higher, and it wasn't a gruff voice in any way. So it fit his character.
Yeah.
Which was, very good.
Yeah.
And he'd also been trained in stage acting and how to do that. But when dialogue and more dialogue came along, he worked with a dialogue coach and worked, with it. During Professor Beware, Cat's Paw, I mean, there was a lot of dialogue in those. Movie Crazy, which is one of my favorite movies. I love him in Movie Crazy.
Interesting. Trouble.
Yeah, Trouble.
I just watched it.
Yeah.
um, but backtracking again, because I'd love for people to be aware of this. You know, we talked you talked about the thrill films, which, like you said, there weren't a whole lot of them. You know, there was Safety Last, there was High and Dizzy, there was Never Weekend, which I love, by the way.
Oh, yeah, isn't that, I love Never Weekend.
That's
And there
great.
was Look Out Below.
Right. And but you know what people don't may or may not realize is that he was not working with a complete set of hands. So which is really remarkable. So could you tell us, you know, what happened in 1919 that changed how we did things?
Um, well, he was in 1919. He had a lot of changes in 1919. In late 1918, he had a lovely leading lady named Bibi Daniels,
Mhm.
who was a lovely person. He was madly in love with her. They dated, they were engaged. And she decided that at the end of her contract, she decided, and I think her mother she was younger than Harold. And she started in films early on. She was like 15. And they'd made a lot of films together, but she thought maybe she should go and be a dramatic actress, which she ended up doing, and doing musicals like 42nd Street with um, Patsy Kelly, no, Ruby Keeler. And anyway, she married a fabulous man named Ben Lyon, who was an English actor, and they had a great show together. And she did wonderful things for the English government, who were her adopted country, and she got nicknamed. She was named Dame by King George for her war efforts. And Harold and she stayed incredibly close. In fact, they died 1 week away apart from each other.
Hmm.
And Harold and I went and saw her with Dad the last time he ever saw her in the fall of 1970. And they both passed away in March of 71. But she was a real spitfire, and she really loved keeping up with him. And they used to go to dance marathons and win huge trophies, and they loved to dance together, and they had such spirit. But she came to him and she said, "You know, Harold, I'm not going to re-sign a contract with you, and I'm also I'm going to break our engagement." And she gave him back her engagement ring and broke the contract. So he had to go out with Roach, the two of them, looking for a new leading lady. And he said, "Hey, I want somebody different. Instead of having smoky dark eyes and dark hair, I want a different look. I want a blonde. I want a blue-eyed blonde. I want her demure. I want her." He was kind of looking for more of a Mary Pickford type. Anyway, they'd seen this girl, and Roach and he, started viewing films of young ingenues and everything, and they came across a film called Weaver of Dreams, and it starred a young girl named Mildred Davis, and he said, "Well, let's bring her in." And when they found out that she'd come to town, done 2 films, she was in high school, and she went back to Tacoma, Washington, and said, "Oh, I don't want to have anything to do with Hollywood. I'm finished with them." Well, anyway, they got a hold of her and said, "Hey, Harold Lloyd would like to see you as new leading lady." Well, I guess Mildred Mid changed her mind and said, "Oh my God, okay, I'll go to Hollywood and meet him." And she thought he was looking for a sophisticated leading woman, gal. And she had long, beautiful curls. She chopped them all off and came into the studio looking grown up. And they went, "Are you the same? Are you the same Mildred Davis that we saw in this film?" And she said, "Well, yeah, but I've grown up." And they said, "You haven't grown up that much in like 6 months or something." Anyway, he decided he said, "Okay, I'm going to hire her. I like her presence. I like her look. I kind of like her little spunk to her. Tiny little thing. She was only 4'11".
Mhm.
And so they were making their 3rd film, and they were in the middle of shooting, and Roach said, from hand to mouth, and Roach said, "Hey, would you oh, that's such a sweet picture.
Yeah.
There's her publicity picture, and this is them. They'd been married, oh my God, over 50 years then. Oh, no, maybe, yeah. They were almost on top of their 50th anniversary. That he kept that picture of them in his dressing room his entire life. Anyway, so what happened was, Roach just said, would you please go and do a publicity stills on the film on Saturday afternoon at the studio and the John Weitzel's studio. And he said, sure. So he went down there. He had his first AD with him. Uh, uh, and they were coming up with ideas and going through props and what could they use. Anyway, and they went to look and they came up with, which they thought was a paper mache bomb, and he was going to light a cigarette from the fuse from the bomb. And he went to light the fuse and the fuse went really fast. And he had the cigarette here and the bomb in his right hand. And he said to the photographer, I don't think you can see my face. He said, there's too much smoke. He dropped the bomb and the bomb went off and it was a real bomb. They never found out who did it. It was actually in a locked drawer in the photographer's office. The first AD had found it, but they never did anything about it. He went cold on the floor and he woke up. He got there was a little boy assistant, camera assistant. He got him out on the street, blew a hole in the 16-foot ceiling of the studio. They got him to then he passed out totally. They got him to the hospital. And when he woke up, his face was bandaged, his eyes were bandaged, his face and his right hand. And he said, my God, why are my eyes bandaged? And they said, well, you've had gunpowder residue put into your eyes and right now you can't see. And your face, you've got some facial burns. And they said, we're pretty sure you're going to get your sight back and we're sure, your face will heal. They didn't have antibiotics then or salves or anything, this is 1919. But they said, Harold, unfortunately, you have lost your thumb and your index finger and half of your right palm in the accident. And we couldn't save it. So from that point on, Harold Lloyd did all his thrill pictures and all his movies with half a right hand, but he never wanted the public to know this. So he said to Roach, let me pull my films. We've got enough in the can. Don't put them out every week. Put them out every 3 weeks. Give me a little time. I'll get my sight. Got his sight back first in his left eye, first in a couple of weeks, and then his right eye about 3 months later. His face started to heal. I mean, even to the day he passed away, he had this little scar here, but it was like a pop mark scar, that you'd get. Mm-hmm. And he said, let's see what happens. And everybody came to him, Doug Fairbanks, who was one of his best friends, and Mary. And they said, listen, we've got United Artists, come with us. And he said, you've got your comedian, you got Charlie over there. You don't need me. I'm just would be a second layer. And he said, but let me see if I can get in front of the camera again. Anyway, he got his sight, his face was getting better, but his hand, they weren't sure what to do with. And he said, well, I want to keep it as quiet as possible. I don't want people to come to my films looking for my hand, looking for my accident, which of course could never happen today. And then Roach went and talked to Sam Goldwyn, and Sam Goldwyn said, hey, I have an uncle who owns a glove manufacturing company. And he said, and his name was Goldfish. And he said, let me talk to him. Let's see what we can do. Let's come up with a glove that's skin-like, and we'll put it on you, and we'll put something in there so you can maybe move the fingers a bit. And Harold said, great. And I can learn how to do everything with my left hand. And he was a righty. He wasn't a lefty. And and he went back 8 months later with my grandmother, who had stayed at the Roach Studios, working with Snub Pollard, doing other little movies, honing her craft. And they went back to the same scene that they'd shot on Friday, 8 months before, and off they went. And that's how he dealt with it. And he didn't say anything. He was very private about it. He didn't wear a glove in public. He'd just slip his right hand into his pocket. And that's how he carried on. And he made the most brilliant films after that point. He made his best films, his best work ever, even though, in the beginning, these were two-reelers he was building and building, as you said, Beth, his character and what his brand and what kind of comedy he really did. But he really, after that point, nothing could stop him. Very much like his character.
This is true. Like Speedy, which is one of my favorite
Very much
films. Which actually, Speedy got me completely into Harold because you had actually brought that film to New York in, I don't know, 2003, 2004, something like that.
Yeah, 2000. I did it with Bruce Goldstein at the Film Forum. We did a 10-day marathon festival on Harold Lloyd.
I remember seeing it at Town Hall with the Mont Alto Orchestra.
Yes, I did that too.
It was hilarious because I had never seen. So this is another thing, and I have so many questions, and we're running out of time. But I used to watch TV all the time as a kid. I never saw Harold on TV. So this was the first time I ever saw Harold was in Speedy, which was filmed primarily, not completely, but primarily here on location in New York. And I went to see it because I wanted to see the locations in New York because I'm a historian. I was completely, won over.
They're all still there now. All the locations. Harold isn't, but the locations are.
Yeah, no, I participated in a book and taking pictures of current locations from Speedy.
If your fans or who is watching this, Speedy's going to be shown at the TCM Film Festival, and my dear friend and beloved colleague Bruce Goldstein did a beautiful documentary on the shooting of Speedy in New York, and he takes you on a full tour of all the locations with Scott McGee from TCM, and they're going to show that documentary accompanying Speedy at the Turner Film Festival.
Bruce has joined the meeting, just so you know.
Yes,
Bruce did. Oh my.
he's here.
How wonderful. Maybe he can speak up and give us a little details of what he's going to be doing at the TCM Film Festival.
Should we? Hello, Bruce.
We didn't hear anything from Bruce.
I'm muted.
Anyway, it's one, he did wonderful, but he's done a couple of these. He did one on, he just did one on, like gangsters movies in New York and all the places they did. He's just such a fabulous film historian, and everything he does, and his work that he does with Nicholas Brothers, his documentary he did on them, and they've shown that at Turner, is so fabulous. I mean, he's one of the best film historians in the world.
Cool.
And also one of the best programmers for classic film or retro film.
Right.
He's a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time at the Film Forum. I'm sure a lot of our audience has as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess so two things. First of all, where I was going is that we just didn't see a lot of Harold for a really long time, which is,
well, that's because of Harold.
Yeah,
that's the answer. It was because of Harold, and he didn't want to show his films on television. Like, Chaplin showed his films on television, but he had 8 children to feed. 2 of the other ones were grown. I guess they were okay, but he had a lot of children, and Keaton didn't own his own films or wasn't in control. Laurel and Hardy was owned by Roach, and poor, Stan always wanted to pull away like Harold did, and kept saying to Ollie, come on, we've got to get away, and make our own films. But Roach put those and Our Gang on television,
Mhm.
and W.C. Fields, Mae West. But Harold owned his copyrights, owned the films, and he said, why? His argument was, well, he put an incredible price on them to go on television, which was outrageous. So, but he said, why would I do that? Why would I need an editor to go in after I've edited a film, done timing and pacing of all these jokes, and somebody just takes an axe and cuts in the middle of my scene and puts a washing machine commercial or a car commercial in the middle of it, and then you go back to the scene and you don't have the pace and it's not all going together. And that was literally how he felt about it. And people would say, Harold, you're missing generations. This is going to be really hard. And he went, I don't care. They're ruining a film that needs to be shown in its entirety. If TCM had been around, or even, AMC or a cable network like we have now, he would have been the first one there.
Mm.
But he just went, I don't care. Why would they go and do that to my work? And I remember one day, I was homesick from school with a cold, and my grandmother was with me, and Movie Crazy came on. And it was actually, I think, the first time I'd ever seen Movie Crazy. Well, I thought this was the most divine film I'd ever seen. He was playing an actor. He was so cute. He kind of looked like my grandfather. He
Mm.
kind of looked like him, but his voice was exactly the same. And how he delivered lines in it was the same way he talked to me, or he talked to, well, it sounds silly, talked to the dogs, because we had a lot of dogs. And or he talked to my grandmother, he talked to my mom, and it was like, this is remarkable. Well, it was on the $1 Million Movie, and so they'd run it like 10 times a day.
Right.
And my grandmother was sitting there with me, and she said, your dad's going to come home. He's not going to be very happy. She said, maybe we should just turn this off. And I went, no, you can't do this. The party scene's coming, and the magician, I love this. Well, anyway, he bounced in the room and he said, hey, honey, were you feeling bad? You got to, and I went, oh, Dad. I said, my dad, this is wonderful. I've been watching you on TV all day, and it's just like you. It's just like you. And he just went white. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm watching Movie Crazy. And it happened to be in a contract with Paramount. He let it, there was one little problem with distribution for some type of, I don't know, 5% that didn't have the edge on. And boy, I guess he had a few words with the studio and the lawyers, and we never saw that on television again. But I had a wonderful time. I thought, and I just it was because he would take me to movies, and he loved movies. He loved Broadway shows. He loved musicals. He took me, and he'd take me to music concerts, and some of them, oh, sometimes he'd take me. I remember going to Vienna with him, and I had to sit through this whole thing of just three classical player piano, and it was the piano and the bass, and then it was the violinist. I'll tell you, I squirmed and squirmed, and he said, you've got to know all forms of music and entertainment, and he loved all of it. But having his films on television, he wasn't going to go for it.
Mm.
So that's why you missed it. So you thank him for it. I'm blaming it all on him.
Right.
And it's been a hard fight. I must say, for me, it's been a hard fight because I lost people. But after his passing in 91, in 71, we put together a show called Hooray for Harold Lloyd. And it ran here. It was done for Time Life Films and HBO, but it ran extensively in Europe. And Neil Hefti did the theme song, who did the Batman theme song. And I can't tell you how many people, when I do shows in Europe and interviews, come and sing the theme song to me, or ask me if I can do the theme song, or what happened to the show, and why can't they show their kids the show, because they had an affection for him. They come off the bus after school, watch him, and then they go and try and do his tricks the next day with their friends at school. And there's so many people that just found him, kids, especially kids. Harold relates to children more than any comedian I've seen. Kids just want to, he's like the Pied Piper or something. They just, it's his either warmth, his energy, his enthusiasm, and then maybe his faults as a person of getting into situations but being able to get out of them.
Right.
It's a remarkable thing that he seems to, with children especially, he has such a great connection. So it's been hard through the years reintroducing him to people and to fans. And you're lucky that you met him when you were younger and have had this association with his films.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing them, especially tonight, and his works with other people.
That's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this. So again, we're running out of time, but I really want to ask about you and Harold and Mid, because like, how did that all happen? How did you end up living with your grandparents and then
Well,
becoming, the proselytizer of Harold Lloyd?
okay. My parents, my mother was Gloria, his eldest child, and my father was a man named William Orchid Guasti, and Bill Guasti was a very attractive. He looked like Tyrone Power, uh, kind of California playboy, born in California. My mother was too, and she was Harold Lloyd's first child, and she was the first child to ever be on uh, Photoplay magazine, or the first child to be photographed as with the paparazzi came and followed her everywhere, from all her birthday parties to school. And what happened was they got married in September of '50 at the estate of Green Acres, and it was the biggest, oh my God, the biggest probably Hollywood event in 10 years. Because remember, this came out after the war.
Mhm.
And anyway, my father he was pretty spoiled, and I don't think he was a year and a half younger than my mom, and they were married for a very short period of time. I was born in '52, and my parents were separated when my mother was pregnant with me, and then they got back together for a short period of time, and then turned around and were divorced by uh, the end of and separated by the end of '53. So I never really lived with my parents. I lived occasionally when they were trying to patch things up. And the rest of the time, my grandparents stepped in. And actually, when they got a divorce, my grandparents came in and took legal custody of me. And my mom, it really put her at a disadvantage, and she was quite frail.
Mm.
So my grandparents said, no, we'll raise her, we'll take care of her. And my grandparents felt, especially they were thrilled because when their children were growing up, my grandmother retired from films, but Harold was working all the time. And he said, oh my God, this is a second chance of being parents to a little girl. And I know you're showing a picture. This is a Christmas picture. And I must have been about six there. And Harold's on the ground. My uncle is right beside me, Harold Lloyd Jr. My mother is in the red top with the black scarf. That's Gloria. And my grandmother, Mimi. And then the lady on the side with the grayish hair and the glasses, her name's Kathleen Lippiett. We used to call her Miss Kitty. And she actually was the nanny to my uncle, Harold Jr. And when I was born, my grandparents had gone to Europe, had taken me to Europe with them. I was 2, and they talked Miss Kitty into coming back and working for them again and helping them raise me. And she was there the entire time,
Mm.
a wonderful woman. And this was a Christmas. Obviously, you can see all the presents, and I guess I like the puppet.
Is that the famous
Um,
tree?
but they were a great family. They were very loving. My uncle was an actor and he was a singer, and he had two albums out on Coral Record, one on Coral Records, one on Capitol. And my mom was an actress for a while. She was under contract at Universal. She did a film with Merle Oberon and um, Suzanne Ustinov, or Suzanne Cloutier was her acting name. She was married to Peter Ustinov.
Mhm, mhm. So how, so obviously you are the face of the Harold Lloyd estate now. He basically appointed you the trustee of all of this, right? And
Yes,
when
I don't know what was wrong with him that day. I when I picked up the mantle to be trustee, I was 19 years old. I definitely wouldn't have been trusting my 19-year-old children, and I have two, a boy and a girl, at 19. But he was my grandmother had passed away when I was just 17, and I was going to be a senior in high school. And then I lived with my grandfather, and but he knew I had an interest in film, and it was kind of very Machiavellian of him, or smart. I was hanging around with a lot of kids that went to SC Film School, Marymount Loyola, UCLA Film School, and he knew I was interested. But he also knew that I loved hanging out around with the guys and figuring it out, even though they gave me really nasty, dirty jobs to do, like clean nitrate film with a cotton ball and a solution, and then rewrap it with adding paper and put it on a reel and wrap it, and then have to air it back out 6 months later, and you know uh, label the film cans and put them on the racks. I remember I used to come up, I'd say to Dad, I'd say, "Oh, God, look, my nails, I have, what, Dad, I had a manicure and it's eating into my nails." And he said, "Don't worry, don't worry. This is a learning process. Don't you worry, honey." He said, your nails can be fixed. You can just go out and get another manicure. But he said, you have to realize the elements of film and where film came from and how it has to be taken care of. He said, it's not all premieres and parties, and it's hard work. And there are a lot of different ways. So he said, you just stay down in that editing room and keep doing that job. And then I started going to labs, and we started cleaning up the films and doing wet gate printing and timing and prints and fine grains, and so I was kind of trained in it. But he was trying to kind of train me in a fun way, so it wasn't like, you need to do this. He wanted to see if I could do it. I think it was like, if she's really interested, she'll stick at it. If she isn't, so that's,
Plan B.
I've been doing it a long time now.
Right, right. You're doing an amazing job. So now we're at 9:20 already. I think we probably, if we have questions, we should probably move on to that. So Mark, that's your.
We have one question in there from James Hoffman, is it? Jacques Tati, who did such films as Mon Oncle and Playtime, was heavily influenced by the early silent comedies of Hollywood. When he won an Oscar for Mon Oncle in 1959, he used his trip to Hollywood as an opportunity to meet some of his idols, including Harold Lloyd. The question, did your grandfather have any opinions on the work of Jacques Tati or any other stories about meeting him?
Yes, he loves Jacques Tati. And I think they'd met before that, but there is a wonderful picture of Jacques Tati, Harold, and Buster Keaton at the Berlin Film Festival in the early 60s. Now, I want to say it's 62 or 64. And I do have that photograph in our archive. Um, because Harold was very good at saving all his stills from his films. He loved Jacques Tati, and he really admired admired his work. And I think they really you kind of got me at a disadvantage because I was so much younger then. So, but I think they corresponded. And when Harold would go to France, they'd meet up and see each other.
Yeah.
I was taken to see Chaplin at a very young age, and my mother was living in Switzerland, and she lived over there for a number of years in Europe. And one day they said, "Oh, we were in Geneva," and they said, "Well, we're gonna go on a trip, and you're gonna be able to play with a whole bunch of little kids and have a nice time, and Dad's gonna go see somebody who um, is a real dear friend, a friend of ours, and they're in the same business, and they didn't work together, but they were kind of in the same business, and we're just gonna go drive over there and stay." In visit them, and I was visiting Charlie Chaplin. That was the explanation of who he was. It wasn't like he's an actor. He were just in the same business. It was like being, well, Dad's a plumber, and we're going to see the other plumber down the street, and he's got some kids. It was very casual, but I do know that he had great affection for Jacques Tati. And he had great affection for, you know, different comedians, even comedians coming up, as I said about Jack Lemmon. He loved Red Skelton. He started Lucille Ball. He pulled her out of just being a second B actress and gave her first lead in A Girl, a Guy, and a Gob at RKO that he produced.
Okay,
I hope that answers his question.
The next question I have from Joe. Harold was so brilliant at the business end as well as the creative side. Why did he stop making films? And had he had to end up not having control of his return film with Preston Sturges?
He about retiring. I don't think he really kind of meant to retire, but he was looking for certain scripts. I think he felt by working with Preston Sturges, who he adored, he wanted to do that. He was good friends with Howard Hughes too. Howard Hughes produced that film, but Preston and he actually sued Howard Hughes after making that film because Hughes pulled it. But in the middle of that, Howard Hughes had his massive plane crash on Linden Drive in Beverly Hills. And when he did that, Howard just totally, he was taken out. I mean, he couldn't, function. So Harold and Preston went ahead with the film and kept going. And Harold changed his, Howard came in and changed the whole film. Because when they first put it out, it was getting some good reviews, and then Howard pulled it. Harold, as to making more films, he kind of said it was such a struggle with the last film. He said, it's not like you run your own show anymore, and you've got all these executives and all these different people putting their opinions in. And he said, and it gets harder and harder. And he said, I kind of felt like I wanted to go and see the world. I had other interests. I'd like to paint. I like photography. He was now at this point in his life in 1947, he was going up the divan to run the Shriners hospitals, and he was going to be imperial potentate, and he was from 49 to 50, which was a huge job of running 22 hospitals. He just said, maybe when something special comes along, I'll jump back in, but let some of the younger people do it. Give them a shot. It was like, I had a great ride, but I want to do other things and enjoy my family, and that's kind of how it slipped away, and he retired. And then he came back with doing 2 compilations.
I think we have time for 2 questions that I can probably run them together. As the 50th anniversary of your grandfather's passing, will there be a tribute or any festival or on AMC or TNT? And is there any interest in making a biopic about him?
I would, and this gentleman, I would love to make a biopic. I would. Please write any of your studios or anybody at cable television, Apple and Netflix and everything. Yes, I've been trying to make a biopic for a while. I had a very great article just run in Vanity Fair last month with the great film writer, historian Carrie Beecham, and it's called Sleight of Hand. And I have been trying very hard to do that. I do have a feature animated film that is in the process of being made, and it's with Cinesight, and that should be out in late 22, early 23. And I would love to make a biopic on his films. I'd also, in my heart of hearts, love to remake Movie Crazy.
Wow. Okay, so Mark, was that the last question that you had?
Yeah, that would be it.
Okay, because the one thing I would like to mention before we wrap up is, Sue, you have made Harold's films so accessible on YouTube. You have your own, there's a Harold Lloyd YouTube channel now. You've got uh, one reelers all the way up to, what do you have on there? Speedy and the Kid Brother. So like full length features, it's all there. So people can go and watch, Harold's films right now, which is amazing.
Well, thank you. And well, with YouTube, they chop them up and people put other music onto them, and then they do different things. And I kind of thought, well, maybe we should have a channel that, and he's been out on YouTube for years, what, 15 years or longer. And I finally just went, well, I think I maybe should just pull all the kids back into the barn and clean them up and then and put them out together. Um, it seems it's just very new. I just started doing it a few months ago,
Yeah.
but he's showing up on TikTok too,
Excellent.
which is really cute.
That's cool.
And so that will be coming out. And as I said, Turner Classic Movies is going to show Bruce Goldstein's great documentary on the making of Speedy, and they'll be showing Speedy too.
Yeah, Speedy's on, I believe it's on April 26th. So it's coming up.
Yes, it is coming up.
Yeah, and also with the YouTube, I kudos for you to use Robert Israel as your composer for the score for these films. He's fantastic. So
No, he's wonderful. I've known Robert for years, and Robert and I have toured in Europe, the United States. We've done so many live shows together. Uh, it's amazing. He's great. I also work with Carl Davis, and I have much. Well, I guess it's because I'm here kind of running the show for Harold, but he loved innovative music and he loved music to himself. And I love working with new musicians. Like I've shown his films with Z Trip, who is a great DJ, and he's opens for the Stones and amazing groups, and it's very fun. And I've played with him at Tribeca twice film festival and at Turner, and I've also played with another great DJ at Bonnaroo, Thomas Golovich, and he's actually a real film music supervisor. So taking the films in different directions and putting different music on them gives it a real fresh approach, I believe.
yeah, great. So well, once I know we are like at the end, but once the pandemic is over, will you be bringing these films out again for public consumption?
I hope so. I hope so.
Okay.
I hope so. Yes, people are asking and booking shows. They are. And I do. I also work with a great other composer, Nathan Barr, who wrote, he just picked up the Emmy for Ryan Murphy's Hollywood, but he also got an Emmy for True Blood and Carnival Row. He does wonderful work, and he scored two shorts for me. and he does live shows too. So
Excellent.
yes, all in the future, but we'll get Harold back out there.
Good. Good. I want to see him.
Okay, I
So,
promise. I
excellent.
promise.
So, Mark, I guess we've come to the end, correct?
Thank you very much for inviting me this evening to the Lambs program.
Well,
Thank you, Mark. Thank you,
Thank you
Beth.
for sharing the evening with us, and it's great that he was a fellow member of the Lambs, among others, and we're looking forward to watching his films for years to come.
Well, I think it's wonderful. Actually, he brought me to the Lambs Club for a dinner. It must have been like 67, 68, right there at the end of the 60s. And I remember him saying, no, this is a wonderful place. And it was all for actors. And it was, and he said, I joined in I think he joined 23, 24?
25.
Oh, 25. Okay. Well, a year here, a year there. What does it matter?
100
But
years.
but he wanted me to see the history because he was very proud of it. So it's been really an honor to come and speak with you guys and represent Harold tonight to your viewers.
Yeah, I really thank you so much. This was really wonderful.
And
Well, thank you, Beth.
And thank you,
Thank
Beth,
you.
for setting this up and hosting it. And to our fellow members, be sure to check the calendars and your emails for some of the upcoming virtual conversations. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Night.
Night.